Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, we're talking to Agrii's Adam Simper, National Grassroots and Environmental Seeds Manager, and Hayley Wellings, Forage Technical Specialist. Today, we're going to be asking, how can we make the most of forage? A key question, not just for livestock farmers, but perhaps also for those growing forage crops to improve soil health. So let's ask the experts. So, good morning to you both.
Good morning, Tony.
Morning, Tony.
So, it's fantastic to see you both here, and welcome to Tramlines, your first appearance. So, really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So, Adam, maybe I can start with you. When we talk about forage crops, put it in context. What crops are we talking about?
Well, Tony, I guess when you talk forage crops, you're talking kind of maize, you're talking grass, red and white clovers, multi-species swards, things like chicory, plantains. You're also talking about kind of all different species of root seeds, so fodder beet, swedes, kale, stubble turnips, forage rape. So all of what I just mentioned there, I guess, will kind of sum up what forage is in my eyes.
I guess if we're talking about forage, the primary aim is growing forage, obviously, for fodder for a livestock enterprise. But Hayley, we were talking just before we came on air, so to speak, that actually there's a lot of growers now who are, if you like, more arable focus, who are growing these forage crops for livestock enterprises, for other farmers. You're seeing that in your area, aren't you?
Yes, so I live in North Herefordshire, Tony, and it's probably one of the most diverse counties in terms of agriculture. We've got a big range of crops being grown here, mixture of, you've really got a lot of potato farmers. Some of the farmers in the area are arable farmers. There's a lot of livestock, particularly once you get just over the border into the Welsh borders. Most of that area there being more hilly is purely livestock farmers. But what we're seeing is that some of the growers who have over the years been focused purely on arable crops are starting to reintegrate livestock into the system. One of the big reasons being that it can be a huge help to soil health, trying to build organic matters back up by getting the stock on, obviously sheep coming onto the farm, whether that be the grower buying livestock of their own, or often neighbouring farmers renting a field to put stock on, and that's beneficial both to the livestock farmer in extra grazing and to the arable man in terms of improving his soil health.
So Adam, let's talk about some of these forage crops that we grow in the UK. The assumption, I guess, is that grass is the major crop grown, but can you put that into perspective for us?
So actually in the UK, grass and clover is one of the biggest forage crops around, alongside maize. But in the world, lucerne is actually the biggest forage crop grown.
Why do you think lucerne's not widely grown in the UK?
Probably isn't widely grown as much because lucerne's quite fussy on what type of soil type it can be grown on.
So let's focus in on growing grass for forage. How is the crop doing? How is it performing? And what can growers start to do that can lead to an improvement in the quality of what they're growing on farm?
Yeah, well, I guess if we go back to kind of spring 2020, it was a cold spring. First cuts were delayed because soil temperatures didn't get warm enough as quickly as they normally should do. So that first cut was delayed, which then obviously pushed second cut back later on into the year. And as that happened, some parts of the country certainly experienced some very, very dry and droughty conditions, which just meant that kind of second cut almost didn't happen. Now, I guess kind of, in the UK, it was almost a bit of a tale of two halves, really. Down south, it was very kind of, dry and drought stricken, whereas kind of further north you got, there was a bit more moisture around and they didn't see the effects as much. So like I say, a lot of people, I guess, got caught out with a lack of kind of certainly second cut and also kind of summer forage to graze and to utilise, which then meant they were having to feed kind of valuable winter forage, out in the fields and to buffer feed. So that could potentially have had a knock-on effect on winter forage. I guess then as kind of the rain came, farmers then started to kind of think, well, we need to do something fairly sharpish. So a lot of kind of high yielding short-term mixes were put in to help kind of, buffer, let's call it, kind of third and fourth cut later on in the year.
Hayley, where do farmers start to think about how they can improve these swards?
So, I mean, obviously, the important thing, if we're looking at improving grassland, is making a decision on where on the farm we're going to start. Obviously, we're not going to run out and tackle the whole farm and start tearing up lays left, right, and centre. So the important thing is to go out, go out with a spade, do some soil sampling, and see which fields are performing worst, for want of a better word. And that's where we want to start. Look at the lays that are really letting us down the most and start to improve those first. We can then start to move around the farm, but we want to start with the lays that are performing least well to begin with.
And Adam, what should a farmer be looking for in terms of trying to assess why that sward is perhaps not performing as well as it could do?
First things first, you've got to look at your soils and get them right first. But secondly, I guess growers need to be going out and walking the fields, assessing each sward for perennial ryegrass content. Perennial ryegrasses are high yielding and better D value and higher ME levels compared to kind of weed grasses. So first of all, assess what you've got. If you've got a sward there and you think there's kind of 60% perennial ryegrass there, well then maybe think about overseeding into that. If the sward's kind of open enough. If you've got swards that you think are kind of 60% and low and below perennial ryegrass content, that's probably the time to think about maybe a full reseed. The grass seed breeders have worked hard, and they've kind of, for the last 10 years, they've probably increased yields by about 1% a year. So over 10 years, they've increased yields by 10%. Well, that's massive. But not only that, they've increased D value by 0.5%. So once again, they've increased over the last 10 years, they've increased D value by 5 points. D value obviously has a direct correlation with ME, and in my eyes, kind of D value and ME is what drives livestock production. So if those modern perennial ryegrass varieties aren't in your sward, you can't necessarily maximize on-farm profitability from grass swards.
Yeah, sure. And Hayley, is the end goal to maximise the ME value from that crop?
Absolutely, Tony. Silage quality is a whole topic of its own, which we could spend hours on. But for now, if we just think about ME, which is one of the most important parameters, ME stands for metabolizable energy, and it's a measure of energy in the form of megajoules per kilo of dry matter. Now, Adam's talked about D values and quantities. And if we reseed a lay, we would automatically expect to be producing more silage and increase our quantity. But at the same time, we would also expect to improve the quality of the silage we're producing off that new lay. If we increase our ME by just 1 from, say, 10.5 to 11.5, or from 11 to 12 if we're already producing very good silage, that means we're producing an extra 1,000 megajoules of energy for every 1 tonne of dry matter produced. If we multiply that up over 10 tonnes of dry matter, that's an extra 10,000 megajoules of energy. That's equivalent to just under 2,000 litres of milk. If we're on 45 pence a litre, that's £900 worth. If we were to buy in that extra 10,000 megajoules of energy, that would be equivalent to buying in just under 850 kilos of 12ME concentrates. So there's huge savings to be made by making sure that the quality of the forage we're producing at home is as good as it can be and reducing our bought-in feed costs.
Yeah, sure. And I think in principle, what you're both saying is look at the forage you're growing, review what you grew last year, and look at how it can be improved, because the benefits are clearly there. And you guys are really demonstrating your expertise in your advice to help growers and the listeners here today. Let's move on from grass to maize, another significant source of forage in the UK. Hayley, how's the maize crop looking?
Yes, so there's been quite a bit of difference in maize crops across the country this season. Certainly out east, crops were hit much harder by the droughts. Maize 22 harvest was significantly reduced in yield versus 21 for a lot of growers. Some fared better. Some of the heavier soils kept crops growing for longer, and yields were reduced less. But overall yields are down this year. Adam alluded to it in terms of grassland, but we've seen similar effects in terms of maize carryovers, with growers having to feed out winter stocks to supplement summer grazing. So it's a double whammy effect really, in terms of yields being reduced, but also carryover stocks being eaten into earlier than would have been planned. So as a result, maize stocks going into this winter or through this winter are certainly depleted versus what they would usually be. So this season, you know, it's a year more than any for growers to question their maize variety choice. You know, it's more important than ever that this spring the variety that goes in is going to give the farmer everything that it can. You know, not just growing what the farmer's always grown variety wise, but looking at that variety choice now, whether that is a case of looking to earlier maturing varieties, to open up opportunities of getting a following crop in behind, whether that be for purposes of not leaving bare ground for environmental reasons, but also increasing opportunities for intercropping options, and actually getting another forage crop off of that field during the season. Now, even if we're sticking with a variety of a similar maturity to what we've always grown, perhaps we don't need to go for anything earlier maturing, we still need to look in more detail at the variety options. You can look at two varieties with the same sort of maturity. They may even look the same in terms of their dry matter yields, but actually that doesn't mean that either or will do the same job for you. We can get two varieties in the same maturity class with very equivalent yields, but one might be performing much better than the other in terms of ME yields, or in terms of starch yields, or cell wall digestibility. So it's really important to sit down with your advisors and have a look at the variety choices that are out there and see which one is going to perform best for you. If we're growing maize for beef cattle, then starch yield is going to be one of the things we want to be more interested in. If we're looking for dairy cows, we're going to be looking at that ME and cell wall digestibility. And of course, with AD, quality is also important. You know, the ME yield of that crop is going to make a big difference to our gas output at the end of the day.
Yeah. So some really good advice there. And the key thread of what I understood from that is, you know, you really do need to look at the varieties you're going to be putting in the ground this coming spring. Maize, a lot to learn there. And I would urge listeners to speak to Hayley and her colleagues for some good advice there. Adam, when we spoke before, you talked about helping growers think about how we can get some resilience in the forage that they're producing with the varying weather conditions that we get. And I'm just thinking about, well, how do we do that? We're growing grass, we're growing maize. How do we build some resilience into producing quality forage on our livestock enterprises or on our farms as a whole?
We know that we can grow forage for winter utilisation. We need to change our mindset now and think that we need to grow forage for those drier summer months utilisation. So that could be putting a brassica in the ground, sowing a brassica kind of, April, May time, and having that as your summer forage utilisation for those drier summer months, which then leads itself nicely into a back-end reseed as well. Okay, putting a brassica crop in will help break up the pest cycle in the ground, so it's got benefits there. It'll also do the soil, different rooting structures from the different root crops. It'll also help with soil structure as well. And like I say, we just need to start thinking about growing different crops for summer utilisation, rather than having a grass field there, it burning up and it's not producing the dry matter that's required from your stock. It's not only about roots. There could be an opportunity to have part of your hectareage down to multi-species swards. grass, perennial ryegrass, timothy, red and white clover, plantain, chicory, all these different, multi-species swards, they've got different rooting structures. And certainly, clovers will provide, good proteins into the forage. And also during the summer months, clovers will actually provide good ME yields as well, anywhere from, 11 to 12. So certainly clovers can provide better ME yields compared to kind of, dare I say it, old swards containing rough-stalk meadowgrass, brown-top bent, Yorkshire frog, that type of thing. So building that resilience by root crops for some utilisation and also multi-species swards, it'll just allow us to, like I say, not be caught out by the dry, drought-prone kind of months that we have, and actually have a set plan in place to make sure we've got forage all throughout the year.
Yeah, very interesting what you're talking about there, Adam. And Hayley, from your perspective, what else would you like to add? And I'm thinking here about soil health and the overall vitality of the farm enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, it follows on from what Adam's been saying. I mean, Adam has talked, about the extra quality that we can bring in by using multi-species lays. But the other thing to remember is that by increasing the diversity in a crop, we include different rooting depths with different species. So, I mean, even taking it back to the most simple multi-species lay of a grass and clover mixture, growers out there with grass clover lays in the ground would have noticed that when we had the drought, they had a lot more clover in that lay. And the reason being that the clovers are more drought tolerant than our perennial ryegrasses. Red clover in particular, with its deep taproot, it can get down to that moisture further down and survive through those droutier conditions much better than a pure ryegrass lay is going to. So increasing our diversity, we're getting better depths of rooting, we're getting different depths of rooting. And the other thing about that is that it's also going to help to just keep that soil more friable because we've got those different depths of rooting. And the other thing is that actually from a livestock health point of view, by having different rooting depths from different species, we're increasing the number of micronutrients that we're getting out of the ground into the forage crop and into the stock. So there's huge benefits in terms of both stock health, forage quality and soil health. And as we've said, drought tolerance by using multi-species lays and root crops to give us more diversity of forage.
Very interesting indeed. So as we come towards the end of this particular podcast, what top tips, what would you urge farmers and growers to do that could make a significant difference to their farm enterprise?
So my top tip would be question everything. Don't do something because you always have. Don't do something because the neighbour's doing it. Speak to your advisors, question what you're doing, question what's working well, question what could be better, and work out from there what to do that's best for you and your farm.
And Adam, what do you think listeners should take away from today's podcast that can really help their farm enterprise?
Yeah, I think good point, Sally. I think the only things I'll add to that is kind of know what you've had in the past in terms of yield, whether that's bales per acre or hectare or trailer loads per acre per hectare. Work out, and if you haven't got that, well, start to do that. So you can make a plan as to what fields are underperforming in terms of dry matter requirements. Okay. Walk the field, walk the land, assess what you've got there already, and then make a plan, a good reseeding plan after that. And like I say, don't think of reseeding or kind of root crops as a cost. Think of it as a sound investment. These high compound feed prices at the moment are really focusing growers' minds as to producing more homegrown forage to maximise on-farm profitability.
Well, thank you, Adam and Hayley, for sharing your expert advice today on making the most of your forage. You may find other episodes here on Tramlines of interest too, such as taking stock of understanding your forage, getting the most from your maize, and hybrid rye, a solution to today's farming challenges. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you'd like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.